The sun hadn't come up yet. Sky was still the color of old tin, and the land stretched out quiet and gray like it was holding its breath. Cold mornings like that always settled in my joints before they touched the ground. I was already awake, blanket pulled over my shoulders, sitting on the edge of the porch with one boot on and the other in my hand, rubbing a spot on my heel that never did fit right anymore. My back ached something fierce, and I blamed the cot inside, though truth was, I'd been blaming that cot for 20 years. What really did it was the cold, and the leg that hadn't healed straight since Anthem. 20 years and that ache still showed up like clockwork. I'd fed the chickens before dawn. Smokehouse was still holding steady. Same routine I kept every morning since the war ended, and I came back to this patch of land that never quite forgave me for surviving it. Routine was all I had. A man living alone clings to that like bark to a tree. I was halfway to the barn with a feed bucket when I saw the door. Cracked open. I didn't leave it that way. I set the bucket down, slow. Wind caught the edge of the roof and whistled through the gaps. The barn smelled like it always did. Damp hay, horses, a trace of oil. But there was something else that morning, something human. I stepped inside, careful, my limp worse when I didn't think about it. I didn't carry a rifle, not yet. Just stood there, breathing through the quiet, waiting. They were huddled in the far corner, wrapped up in old hay and what looked like scraps of quilt. A woman, early 30s maybe, was curled around a baby. Her sleeves were rolled too high for weather like this, and her face looked like it hadn't seen rest in days. Clothes worn thin, lips pale. The baby wheezed, soft and shallow, like breath took effort. Beside her was a girl, 8 or 9, knees to her chest. Opposite side were 2 boys, one younger, maybe 5 or 6, and the other older 10, 11 at most. That older one had a crooked stick in his hand, held like a club, arm slung over the younger boy's chest like a shield. I didn't speak, didn't move closer, just watched. The older boy woke first, eyes open, sharp, narrow, like he'd been trained to expect danger. He spotted me and tightened his grip around the stick. No words, just that look. I didn't flinch. I'd seen that kind of fear before, on boys half his age and men twice his size. The woman stirred next, her body tensed like it was ready to flee, even though she had nowhere to run. She shifted quick, pulling the baby closer, shielding it with her arms, but she didn't scream, didn't beg. "We'll be gone by morning," she said flatly. "I know this ain't our place." Her voice was tired, not desperate, not hopeful, just tired. I stood there for a second, let the quiet settle back in. Then I said, even as the cold bit into my throat, "You're on my land." "I know." The little girl mumbled something in her sleep. Her feet were bare, dress torn near the hem. The woman looked like she wanted to pull all 4 children into her coat and disappear. "We were heading west," she said after a pause. "My husband died 3 weeks ago. Fever took him outside Santa Rosa. I kept the children moving, but the wagon broke 2 days back. We walked till we couldn't anymore." I looked down at the children, then at the woman's hands. They were trembling, not from fear, but cold, hunger, exhaustion. "You feed that baby?" "Last of the cornmeal yesterday. They ain't eaten today." I nodded once, didn't say anything else, just turned and walked out. The boy's grip on that stick didn't ease until I was gone. 10 minutes later, I came back with a kettle of warm water and a cloth sack. Bread, dried meat. I placed them near the stall, not too close, then stepped back. The smell stirred the children. The baby whimpered, sniffed once, then coughed. The woman reached for the sack, slow, careful, like moving too quick would make it disappear. She looked up at me. "I don't want charity," she said. "You'll get heat and food till I say otherwise," I replied. "That baby won't survive another cold night." Then I turned and left again. I'd never been a generous man, not because I was mean, just didn't trust need. Too many years watching people lose everything they loved, too many years learning that giving too much gets you nothing but pain. I'd built a life small and tight so nothing could get in or fall apart again. But that morning, with the frost still thick on the ground and silence heavy in the barn, something in me cracked open, just a sliver. Didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew one thing. They weren't going anywhere, not yet, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't want them to. If you've made it this far and felt something in this story, If Caleb's quiet voice and that barn full of weary breath stuck with you, go ahead and like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. There's more to come. Found family takes time, and we're just getting started. I didn't sleep that night. Wasn't the cold, though the wind howled through the eaves and the fire burned down low. It was that baby's breath, the sound of it thin and ragged, echoing in my chest like a memory I couldn't quite place. I kept seeing the way that boy's eyes locked onto mine, like he'd been born expecting betrayal. How the woman didn't ask for mercy, just promised to leave. I didn't know what to call what I felt. Guilt, maybe, or something older and softer I'd trained myself to ignore. Still, I laid there with my blanket pulled to my chin, staring at the ceiling like it might offer an answer, and when the rooster called just before first light, I was already up. By the time I stepped out the front door, frost had settled on the porch rails. My boots, still damp from the day before, bit into my heels, but I didn't mind it. Pain reminds a man he's still here. The barn was quiet as I approached. I didn't knock. Didn't want to wake them if they'd finally managed to sleep, but they were already moving. Martha, though I didn't know her name just yet, had the children lined up along the wall, wiping their faces with a damp rag like she'd done it 1,000 times. She had a fire going outside the barn, small but steady, and that baby was wrapped tighter than before, cheeks pink instead of pale. She didn't look at me when I stepped near the trough, just stirred the little flame with a stick and said, like it was a fact and not a question, "Emma's breathing easier. That kettle water helped. She drank near a whole cup." I nodded once, didn't say much. Just walked past and took the empty pail without comment, down to the pump where my hands stiffened around the iron handle. Cold water splashed up, hit my fingers, and I winced a little more from age than from the chill. I dried my hands on my trousers and brought the bucket back. I didn't look at her when I set it down. "You need anything else?" She turned to face me then, real direct, calm in the eyes, like someone who'd long since run out of room for shame. "What are you asking, Mr. Wren? You a man looking to bargain or looking to judge?" I didn't answer right away. I was watching Benji, the smallest boy, drag a stick across the dirt like he was drawing out a world only he could see. The mule stood near him, still and unbothered, like even the animals knew something different had come to this place. "You ain't looking to beg," I said finally. "I know that much." "No, sir," she said, and her voice had that edge of pride that sounded like it had cost her something to keep. I glanced toward the fence line. "That boy of yours, he wants work. I've got a post leaning on the west side. Could use another set of hands." She didn't answer me right away, just turned her head toward the boy Toby, I'd learn later, who was pretending not to listen. He stood up straighter when he caught her eye. She didn't smile, didn't even nod, just looked back at me and said, "We'll pull our weight while we're here." That was enough. By sundown, I started noticing the shifts, small things at first. Toby helped me haul feed from the shed without being asked. Girl Sadie stood by the chicken coop, watching me like she'd never seen a man toss hay before. Benji tried to chase the mule and got a warning kick for his trouble, but he didn't cry. Just sat back down and started talking to himself again, like nothing had happened. Martha boiled some leftover beans on the fire outside the barn. I handed her a pot without saying a word. She took it the same way. That night, when I stepped out to check the stars before bed, I saw my boots, cleaned, drying on the porch steps. She'd scrubbed them. Didn't say anything about it. Just did it. I looked down at them for a long while, then toward the barn, where the lantern glow flickered soft behind the cracks in the door. I didn't know what kind of woman cleaned a man's boots without asking. I didn't know why it made my chest feel heavier than usual, but I left the door unlatched when I went back inside, lay in bed with the fire low, ceiling beams stretching above me, creaking in the wind. I didn't know what I felt. Duty, maybe. Guilt, probably. Or maybe just that ache you get when you see someone try their best not to fall apart. I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want them gone. Not yet. Maybe not ever. If this quiet moment settled in your chest the way it did mine, I hope you'll like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. This story is not about grand gestures or heroes. It's about staying, and staying takes heart. By the second morning, I stopped pretending they weren't under my skin. The woman, the kids, that wheezing baby with a grip so weak it made my chest twist. I still didn't know their names, not all of them, but I knew their patterns now. Knew the way the older boy, Toby, kept his eyes on me when he thought I wasn't looking. How the girl, Sadie, walked on her toes like she'd learned to move quiet to keep from waking something dangerous. I watched the smallest one, Benji, talk to the mule like it was kin, dragging his fingers through the dust while the animal just stood there calm as rain. And that baby. Emma, her mama had said. Her breathing had smoothed out some, but there was still a tightness to it, like every inhale took too much work. I'd never been one to fuss over children, but I couldn't stop hearing it at night, the whistle in her chest, soft and wrong. I kept to my chores mostly. Feed, water, mend what needed mending. I didn't say much, never been good at words anyhow, but I found myself slowing down near the barn more often than I should have. I'd walk past and find them working, not lazing, not hiding. Martha had taken to sweeping out the hay and packing it fresh, like it mattered. She boiled water over a little fire pit she'd dug out just outside the barn door, used it to wash the kids' faces, wipe the baby down, clean the cloth she kept wrapped tight around her shoulders, and she didn't do it for me. That was clear. She did it because it was what she'd always done. Keep them going, keep them clean, keep them moving like there was still dignity left to claim. I came back from the field that afternoon, arms full of kindling, and found my boots lined up by the porch, scrubbed near spotless, the same ones I'd left caked in mud and smoke. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. There wasn't a note, no look, no thank you for the food or water I'd brought. But that gesture? That was louder than any of it, and I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at them like a man stares at a grave he thought he'd stopped visiting. I brought her a better pot the next day, didn't say why, just handed it off with a grunt, and kept walking. She took it like it was nothing, but I saw the way her jaw relaxed, the way her shoulders settled just an inch. That evening I found her sitting just outside the barn, sewing a patch into a shirt that wasn't mine. The children were gathered around her, Sadie humming to herself as she played with a splintered spoon. Benji was curled up against the mule again, and Toby had taken up the task of chopping kindling without being asked. He worked slow but deliberate, hands placed right, eyes sharp. I'd seen grown men do worse. "You teach him that?" I asked, more to fill the silence than for an answer. She looked up, just once. "No, he learned by watching. Been that way since his daddy died." I nodded, didn't press. Didn't ask how long it had been or what kind of man his father was. Didn't seem like she wanted to talk about it, and I sure didn't know how to ask gently. Later that night, I sat out on the porch like I always did, chair creaking under my weight, a mug cooling in my hands. The wind was softer than usual, stars peeking through a low haze, but the house felt different now, like it wasn't just mine anymore, like the quiet had a shape, and that shape had shifted. From the barn came the sound of a voice, low, steady. Martha. She was reading something. Couldn't make out the words, but the tone was warm, like honey warmed over a stove. Then came a smaller voice, Sadie or Benji, and the softest little laugh. I hadn't heard laughter in that barn since it was built. I closed my eyes, let the sound rest over me like a blanket. There was something in it that pulled at the place I kept buried. A memory I didn't ask for came rushing back. My sister years ago, coughing through the night while Ma sat up holding her. We lost her before she turned 9. Fever took her like a thief in the dark. I remembered the sound of Ma's crying, soft through the cabin wall. I remembered the silence after how it settled thick and heavy and never fully left. And I realized then I'd spent half a lifetime avoiding children because I was scared of hearing that silence again. But these ones, they weren't breaking me. They were filling in something I didn't know was still hollow. And Martha, she didn't ask for rescue. She never would. But somehow, by standing her ground with that quiet pride and keeping her children upright, she'd made it harder for me to keep pretending I didn't care. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't even admit it to myself fully. But when I stepped inside that night and left the door unlatched again, this time on purpose, and left the lantern burning just a little longer, I knew something had shifted in me, and I didn't want to shift it back. That next day settled into something almost like rhythm, though I'd never admit it out loud, not to them, not even to myself. Morning broke colder than the one before, sky low and gray, like a ceiling too heavy to hold up much longer. Frost hugged the barn door edges, and the wind had that sharp snap to it that crept into your bones and stayed there. I rose before the light cracked through the slats in the shutters, boots still damp from where Martha had scrubbed them clean. I didn't thank her. Didn't know how to without it sounding too big, too final. So I pulled them on and stepped out into the cold like I always did. But everything felt different. The barn door creaked on its hinges when I pushed it open, slow and cautious. Wasn't sure what I expected to find them gone, maybe like a dream I'd invented just to fill the quiet. But they were still there, and already up. Martha knelt beside the fire pit she'd built out of stone and care, coaxing the flame back to life. Baby Emma lay swaddled in a basket close by, cheeks pink not from fever this time, but from warmth. The boy Toby was stirring the fire with a stick, hands red with cold, but moving with a kind of purpose I hadn't seen in a child for a long while. Sadie gathered bits of kindling from beneath the old cedar, lips moving as if in a silent song. Benji, the smallest, sat on the stoop chewing a stale biscuit like it was something special. And maybe it was to him. No one said good morning, no one needed to. They were alive, they were moving, and that was more than I could say for a lot of folks I'd known. Martha didn't look up as I stepped closer, but she spoke like she'd been waiting. "Emma's breathing easier. That kettle water helped." She drank near a whole cup. Her voice was calm, not grateful, just honest. I liked that about her. She never begged, never flinched. I didn't answer, just took the empty pail and made for the pump. The cold water bit into my hands as I filled it, the kind of bite that reminded you the world was still turning whether you liked it or not. I dried my fingers slow, leaned on the edge of the trough a while, and watched the sky shift from gray to dull white. Then I walked back and set the bucket beside her. "You need anything else?" I asked, the words rough in my throat. She looked up at me then, steady as always, eyes like river stones. "What are you asking, Mr. Wren? You offering something or waiting for me to slip?" I almost smiled. Almost. "You ain't looking to beg, that's clear." "No, sir," she said, and there was something in the way she said it, like she was still daring the world to break her, and I suddenly wanted to be the one place that didn't try. I nodded toward the field. "That boy of yours, he wants work. Fence on the west side's leaning again. Could use another set of hands." She turned toward Toby, who stood up straighter at the mention. Didn't say yes, didn't say no. Just looked back at me and said, "We'll pull our weight while we're here." And that was enough. By sundown, the whole place had shifted, even if none of us had the words for it. Toby followed me without being asked, helped move sacks from the shed to the barn, his arms still small but full of effort. Sadie stood near the coop, quiet, watching me lift hay like I was doing something worth studying. Benji, of course, tried to chase the mule again and got a warning kick for it. He didn't cry, just sat down and talked to it like he hadn't learned a thing. Martha boiled leftover beans over that same fire outside, the smell rising into the cold like a promise. I handed her a pot from the house without a word. She took it the same way. That evening, after the light had gone and the land settled into its hush, I stepped out to look at the sky. I always did that before turning in. Habit more than anything. But this time, something stopped me. At the porch steps, my boots were drying clean, orderly, as if someone had cared enough to make them so. She hadn't said anything about it, just did it. I stared at them for a long while, longer than made sense. Then I looked toward the barn. Didn't see her, but I felt her presence all the same. I didn't say thank you, not out loud. But when I walked inside that night, I didn't latch the door. And when I lay on that cot, staring at the ceiling beams and listening to the faint sound of children breathing through wood and wind, I realized I didn't want them to go. Not tomorrow, not the next day. I wasn't ready for the silence to come back, not yet. Maybe never again. I never asked if they planned on staying, and they never asked if they could. That seemed to suit us all just fine. Words were risky. You could say too much, or worse, say something that meant more than you intended. So we worked around them. Martha kept to her corner of the barn, and I kept to mine, but each day, that line between hers and mine blurred a little more. I noticed it in the way her hands moved, quick and sure when she was sorting through the sack of supplies I'd left, laying each thing out like it mattered. A cracked spoon, a button without thread, a strip of cloth she'd torn from her own petticoat and used to wrap the baby. She handled it all like it was precious, like survival had made her precise. It reminded me of my mother, years ago, folding clothes by candlelight after my father passed. That same look in the eyes, tired but not broken, focused like the only thing left was the next task in front of you. Sadie was humming again, always soft and low, like she was afraid to disturb something. She sat in the dust, drawing shapes with her fingers, not asking for anything, just being still the way only children who've learned to wait can be. Benji had fallen asleep against the mule again. That animal still hadn't kicked, not once. Just stood there, like it understood. Animals know things. I've believed that all my life. And if that mule hadn't run off yet, neither would they. I came back from the field just before sundown. My shirt clung to my back and my leg was stiff, but the rhythm of the work had quieted something in me. I had firewood under one arm and a tin box in the other. I didn't say a word when I handed it to her. She looked at me, then opened the lid spools of thread, a pair of shears, needles, a thimble, some canvas patches. She stared at it for a long time before she spoke. "I'll earn it," she said. "I ain't keeping tally," I answered. "You should." I didn't respond to that. Didn't need to. That night, we ate cornbread and beans. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and it was shared, and that made it different. After dinner, I sat on the porch like always, listening to the creak of the wood beneath me, watching the moon climb slow into the dark. But something had shifted. The land didn't feel quite so empty. It used to be I'd sit out there and hear nothing but wind and the occasional owl call. Now from the barn, I could hear Martha's voice reading something to the children in a hush, just above a whisper. Couldn't make out the words, but the tone carried, soft, steady, like she was building something invisible, something that held them safe. Then I heard a smaller voice, Benji maybe, a word, then a little laugh, not loud, just a flicker of joy that caught me off guard. I turned my eyes back to the stars, but the memory had already pulled me backward. I had a sister once, younger. Fever took her when she was just about Sadie's age. I remembered the sound of Ma crying through the cabin walls. I remembered how quiet the house got after that. Not peaceful, hollow, like a bell that had stopped ringing. I told myself for years that I didn't like children, claimed they were too loud, too messy, too unpredictable. But that wasn't it. Truth was, I didn't like the grief that came when they disappeared. I didn't like the echo they left behind. But these ones, they weren't a burden. They didn't ask for more than they needed. They weren't pulling me apart. They were settling into the empty places like they were made for them. And somehow, without a single promise or plan, I found myself hoping they'd stay. Later, when I stepped inside for the night, I didn't latch the door again. That was becoming a habit. I left the lantern burning too, just a little longer. Light felt different now. It wasn't about safety anymore. It was about invitation. And when I lay down, I didn't stare at the ceiling. I closed my eyes and pictured the sound of that small laugh, the soft murmur of Martha's voice, the scrape of boots in dirt. I didn't feel the weight of the cot or the stiffness in my back. I just felt the presence of people, not visitors, not strangers, but people finding their place. They hadn't said they were staying, but neither had they said goodbye. And I wasn't about to ask them to. I didn't plan to take her into town. Wasn't the kind of decision I made easy. Town had a way of looking at people, especially people who didn't fit into its neat little boxes, and I'd done my best over the years to stay just outside its lines. But that morning, standing by the barn door, watching Emma's chest rise slow in that patched-up basket and hearing Martha stirring oats with a cracked spoon like it was a silver pot, I realized she needed things I didn't have, things only Pike's store could offer, and I couldn't bring back enough of it alone without raising questions. "I'm heading to town," I said, voice low. Martha looked up, hands still around the pot handle. "You need something?" she asked. I shifted my weight. "You any good at talking to folks?" She gave a small half-smile. "Depends who's asking." I nodded toward the wagon. "They'll talk if you're with me. Otherwise, they'll talk behind my back." She didn't argue, just gave that quiet, understanding look like she'd already figured it out before I said it. So that's how she ended up beside me on the bench seat of my old wagon, Emma in her arms wrapped in 2 blankets, and that frayed shawl Sadie had dug from a trunk I hadn't opened in years. I didn't tell Martha why I'd kept it. She didn't ask. The road into town wasn't long, but it felt it. Dirt stretched ahead of us like something waiting to be crossed, And the silence between us wasn't heavy, it was thoughtful, the kind that didn't need filling. As we rolled past the chapel steps and the blacksmith's, folks started to look. Not with malice, not exactly. Just that small-town curiosity, that quiet judgment that never needed words to land sharp. At the general store, Mr. Pike leaned forward behind the counter, like a man who'd been waiting for something to confirm his suspicions. "Caleb," he said, no warmth, no cold, just neutral. "Need milk?" "Milk, flour, and salt," I said plainly. His eyes drifted to Martha, still holding Emma like the most natural thing in the world. Her chin was up, shoulders squared. She didn't shrink, didn't smile either. "She yours?" Pike asked, blunt. I looked him dead in the eye. "She's with me," I said, and then, firmer, "Ain't that enough?" Pike didn't answer, just turned and fetched what we needed. Martha's voice was low, steady. "They think we're together." "They think worse when they don't know what they're looking at," I said. She glanced sideways at me, sharp but curious. "And what are they looking at?" I didn't answer, mostly because I didn't know yet. Something was forming between us, sure as the land turned in seasons, but it didn't have a name I trusted just yet. Didn't feel right to say anything before it was solid. We stopped by the blacksmith's to trade for a new spade handle, then passed the chapel again. Mrs. Larkin stood out front, sweeping the steps like she thought dust could be reasoned with. She squinted when she saw Martha, not a word spoken, just that look like she'd tuck it away to unwrap over supper with the neighbors. "She'll tell the whole county," Martha muttered. "Let her," I said, not looking back. We got home before sundown. The moment we rounded the corner, Sadie came running from the barn with that broken doll she'd found in an old crate. Benji pointed at the candy in Martha's hand like she was carrying gold. I hadn't seen that kind of joy in years, honest, unguarded, like the weight of the world had lifted just for a second. That night, after the children were fed and the lantern was hung low, I sat on the porch like always. Martha came out after a while, arms folded, standing just to the side. "Why'd you take us in?" she asked, voice softer than usual. I didn't look at her right away. "Didn't mean to." She nodded. "Thought so." "I just didn't send you away," I added. "That's not the same." I thought about that, let it settle in me. Then I said, "Your boy, Toby. He sees things. Fence work, hinge on the coop, loose nail on the stall door. He works hard, doesn't ask for nothing." She smiled, faintly. "He's had to grow up too fast." I nodded, because I knew that look. I'd seen it in my own eyes once. "Reminded me of someone." "Your own son?" "No, I never had one." A pause, long enough to feel. "I had a younger brother, died before I came back from the war. I was supposed to take care of him." Martha didn't speak. She just sat down beside me on the step, not close, not touching, just there. Emma was getting better, she told me. Smiled for the first time since her daddy died. I didn't say anything, but I heard her. Felt it settle somewhere deep. When I got up and went inside, I came back with the second porch chair, set it beside mine. Didn't offer it with words, just sat down and leaned forward, waiting for her to fill the quiet. She didn't, but she stayed. The wind had been picking up since late morning, but I didn't think much of it at first. Just another gust rolling off the flats, or so I told myself. But by noon, the sky had that look too still, too orange, the kind of color that doesn't belong to any season. And by the time the chickens started crowding in corners and the mule refused to come out of the barn, I knew what was coming. Dust storm, the kind that moves faster than you think, strips paint, blinds livestock, and settles in your lungs like regret. I stood on the porch with my arms folded tight, watching the fence line disappear behind a curtain of grit. The land went gray, and then red, then gray again. I could barely see the cedar tree 10 yards out. Behind me, Martha wrapped Emma tighter in her quilt. She'd already tied a second scarf around her own hair and was moving with purpose, not panic. That told me everything I needed to know. She'd seen storms before, not this kind maybe, but enough of life's hard weather to know how to get through one. Toby came in with the water buckets before I had to ask. Sadie and Benji were dragging crates to the far wall of the barn, coughing with every breath but not slowing down. "We'll keep to the stone room," Martha said, voice firm. I didn't argue. That root cellar hadn't been touched in a decade, not since the last time I thought I might need it, and then didn't. But now it might be the only place worth trusting. I moved fast as my bad leg would let me, pulling open the heavy door near the hill behind the barn. The wind slammed it against the frame once before I caught it. "Move quick!" I barked, sharp without meaning to. "Cover your faces. Hold on to the little ones." They listened. Inside, the air was still and stale, smelling of cedar and dirt and thyme. It wasn't much, just old crates, an oil lamp, a cot I barely remembered storing, but it would hold. I shut the door behind us and sealed the latch, then sat on a crate near the back, wiping grit from my eyes and waiting for the sound of the storm to settle. It didn't. The wind screamed above us like it was trying to tear the land apart. Emma whimpered in Martha's arms, her little head tucked under her chin. Benji clung to Sadie, eyes squeezed shut. Toby sat across from me, watching me the way a boy watches someone older to decide whether to be scared or calm. I held his gaze and gave a small nod, not too big, just enough to say, "We'll be all right." "It's just a bad wind," I said, low and even. "Won't last," but it did. Hour passed after hour, that storm dragging itself across the land like it had nowhere else to be. The oil lamp flickered, shadows stretching across the packed walls. At one point, Martha leaned back against the cot, Emma asleep on her chest. She didn't speak for a long time, then said, "You ever ride out one of these before?" "Once," I said. "With my father. I was about Toby's age. Took the roof right off the house." "What'd you do?" "Listened to him pray," I said. "Then we rebuilt what blew away." She gave a quiet laugh at that, tired but real. Toby shifted beside me. "You think the coop's gone?" "Maybe," I said. "But the mule's smarter than most people. He'll be fine." Sadie looked up from where she held Benji's hand. "Will our wagon be there?" I hesitated. I didn't want to lie. "No," Martha answered for me, gentle but clear. "It's old. We knew it wouldn't last." Sadie nodded and lowered her head. No tears, just quiet acceptance, which somehow hurt more. After a while, I got up and checked the latch. Still held. That was something. Then I looked around the shelter, looked at all of them, my house now full of other people's breathing, my silence filled with small, warm sounds, blankets scattered on the floor, boots in a pile, a baby's soft whimper, a girl's hand holding her brother's. None of them were mine, but somehow they were. "You don't have to hold all of it alone, Caleb," Martha said, her eyes meeting mine. "I know," I said, but truth was, I didn't. Not really. The words sat strange in my mouth, not bitter, just unused. When the wind finally quieted, it left the land looking bruised. Porch roof half torn, chicken coop flattened, dust as thick as snowfall across every surface. But the barn was still standing. So was the house. The mule was skittish but alive. The wagon, what was left of it, had splintered near the edge of the fence, canvas shredded, wheels broken. Benji stared at it like a friend who didn't make it. Martha didn't say anything. Just picked up what little was left, a bent tin cup, a baby sock, a horseshoe she'd kept for luck. I didn't offer words. None of them would have mattered. That evening, no one asked, but they didn't go back to the barn. They came inside. Martha swept dust from the corners. Sadie helped with the stove. Toby scrubbed grit from the porch. Benji curled against my leg while I sat near the fire, Emma asleep in his arms. And for the first time in my life, when I looked around that room and saw all that mess, all that noise, I didn't think of it as something broken. I thought of it as home. If you're starting to feel what Caleb's beginning to realize, that family isn't always born but found in the storm, then go on and like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Because the winds may come, but it's who stays with you that matters most. The morning after the storm, the world didn't look the same. The light came through in strange angles, cutting through the dust that hung low over everything. I stepped out onto the porch and saw the sky, bruised and washed out like it had been wrung dry. The coop was flattened, roof scattered across the yard. Porch slats cracked under my feet, but the house still stood. The barn, too. The mule was spooked but breathing. The storm hadn't taken everything, just enough to remind us who was in charge. The wagon was done for. I found it leaning like an old man at the edge of the field, wheel snapped clean, canvas shredded to ribbons. Benji stood next to it in silence, holding on to the bent side rail like he could still hear it moving. He didn't cry, just blinked slow, dust still on his lashes, like he was saying goodbye without knowing how. Martha came behind him, quiet as shadow, and knelt to pull out what hadn't blown away, a tin cup, a baby sock, a bent horseshoe she'd tied to the wagon's front rail. She didn't speak, didn't curse, didn't sigh. She just gathered the pieces like they still had meaning, and I suppose they did. We didn't talk about what came next. We didn't need to. That evening they came inside, not the barn, not huddled in the hay, inside the house. I didn't invite them. They didn't ask. They just moved like it was time, like something unspoken had shifted in the storm and couldn't shift back. Martha swept the corners, her motions sure and steady, like she was dusting off an old memory. Toby scrubbed the porch without being told. Sadie helped cook a bit, careful with the pot, hands small but deliberate. Benji leaned against my leg by the fire with Emma in his lap, both of them warm and breathing like they belonged there. I sat still, letting the sounds wrap around me. Boots on the floor, a spoon clinking in a pan, the rhythm of living things, filling up the spaces I'd forgotten were hollow. Next morning, just after the sun rose over a sky that still looked raw, Sheriff Alden rode up with Everett Pike tagging along behind. They came slow, not with haste, which meant they weren't looking for a fight, but weren't far from it either. I met them on the porch, let the door swing shut behind me. Alden tipped his hat. "Morning, Caleb." Everett didn't bother. "You got squatters on your land, Wren." I didn't flinch. "I got a family keeping warm." Everett's face soured. "You don't get to adopt strays just because you've got extra space. Woman's wagon's still broken and sitting on public trail. I've had complaints." I crossed my arms, not angry, just rooted. "They're not hurting anyone." "Maybe not yet," Everett said sharp, "but folks are talking. Man like you, living alone all these years, now taking in a woman and her children, ain't proper, ain't right." Alden cleared his throat. "It's not illegal, Everett. It's not decent either." I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. "You here to take the wagon or start a rumor?" Everett's lips thinned. "Just letting you know we're watching." They turned and rode off without another word. That night, I didn't sit out on the porch. I stayed inside, knife in hand, sharpening it slow at the kitchen table. Not because I needed to use it, just needed to feel something solid in my grip. The fire popped behind me. Martha stood at the hearth, drying a pan. She didn't look over when she spoke. "You knew they'd come." "I figured it was coming," I said. "You think they'll push it?" "They'll try." She paused, then turned to face me. "We can go." I didn't lift my eyes from the knife. "And go where?" "Las Lunas, my brother." "You haven't heard from him in 2 years." She didn't answer. I finally looked up, set the knife down with a clink. "They're not worried about you," I said. "They're worried what it means if you stay, if I let you stay." Her voice dropped. "And what does it mean?" I stared at her for a long time, but the words didn't come easy. "I don't know yet." She took that like a blow. Didn't show it, not outright, but I saw the way her jaw tensed, the way her shoulders drew in. She turned away and I stood, walked to the window where the lantern outside the barn still burned from earlier. Next morning, I took the wagon into town alone. Past Mrs. Larkin on her stoop, she didn't wave. Pike at the store didn't say much either, just handed me the salt and nails and muttered something about hard winters. As I turned to leave, I paused. "You think I'm doing something wrong?" Pike looked up, startled. "No, but folks out here, when things change, they don't say if it's good or bad. They just call it dangerous." I didn't argue, just left. Back home, I found the children behind the house, working the garden. Martha had dug out old seed packets from the back of my cabinet stuff I'd forgotten I even had and started turning the dirt. Sadie was singing under her breath. Benji dragged a watering bucket with a serious face. Emma sat in a basket in the sun, warm and pink and breathing clear. "You went alone," Martha said as I approached. "You didn't ask," I said. "I'm not looking to be your burden." "You're not. I don't need a savior. I'm not trying to be one." She stood then, brushing dirt from her apron, hands shaking just slightly beneath the strength. "Then what are you trying to be?" I looked at her, steady, my voice quieter than I meant. I'm just trying to hold what I can and maybe not lose it." She didn't speak after that, just nodded once. That night, Sadie curled up under my old army coat in the corner of the living room. Benji started calling the barn dog Scout, and Emma, for the first time, reached for my hand. I didn't let go until she did. The wind had settled, but something else was stirring, something quieter, but just as heavy. You could feel it in the way the air sat still, in the way the crows stopped calling. Trouble never arrives shouting, not out here. It rides slow, with pressed collars and polite words, and the weight of other folks' opinions wrapped in law. It was mid-morning when I heard hooves out front, not the clatter of a passing rider or the slow gait of a neighbor checking fences. This was heavier, intentional. I stepped out onto the porch, wiping dust from my hands on my trousers, and saw Sheriff Alden riding in with 2 deputies behind him. One of them was Everett Pike, the banker, his boots far too clean for someone who claimed to know hard work. Alden nodded polite. "Morning, Caleb." Pike didn't wait. "You got squatters on your land, Wren." I didn't blink. "I've got a family keeping warm." "You don't get to adopt strays just because you've got extra space," he snapped. "Woman's wagon's still broken, sitting halfway on public trail. I've had complaints." I crossed my arms, not defensive, just steady. "They're not hurting anyone." "Maybe not yet," Pike said, "but people talk." You think folks haven't noticed? A man living alone all these years, suddenly keeping company with a woman and her children. It's not proper. It's not right. Alden stayed quiet for a long moment, then cleared his throat. "It's not illegal, Everett." "No," Pike spat. "It's not decent either." I looked at them both, calm as still water. I wasn't angry. I'd learned long ago not to let myself burn too quick. It was wasteful. "You here to take her wagon?" I asked, "or just start a rumor?" Pike's jaw tightened. "Just letting you know we're watching." "Then keep watching," I said. "Ain't nothing to hide." They turned and left, the dust from their horses curling up like smoke. I stood there on the porch until they disappeared down the rise, my hands still at my sides, my heart thudding low, not in fear, just in memory. That feeling of being watched, of having your choices weighed by people who've never had to make the same ones. I knew it too well. That night, I didn't sit out like I usually did. I stayed inside, hunched over the table, sharpening my knife slow and deliberate. The metal whispered against the stone, like it had something to say. Martha stood at the hearth, drying a pan with the same cloth she used to clean the baby's face. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "You knew they'd come." "I figured it was coming," I said. "You think they'll push it?" "They'll try." She turned then, arms crossed but not closed. Her voice was steady, even if her hands had that tremble she always tried to hide. "We can go." I looked up, real slow. "And go where?" "Los Lunas, my brother. You haven't heard from him in 2 years." She swallowed that truth without flinching. I stood, pushed back from the table, and walked to the window. The lantern outside the barn still flickered, gold against the night. "They're not worried about you," I said. "They're worried about what it means if you stay." She stepped closer, voice softer now. "And what does it mean?" I wanted to tell her, wanted to say that it meant I wasn't alone anymore, that maybe this old house had stopped being a shell and started becoming a home, but all I could manage was, "I don't know yet." And that hurt her. I saw it in the way her eyes dropped, in the way she folded her arms tighter, not angry, just bracing. The next morning I hitched the wagon and rode into town alone. I didn't tell her I was going. Maybe I should have, but I figured if she needed to ask, we weren't as steady as I hoped. On the way, I passed Mrs. Larkin sweeping her steps again. She didn't look up, just swept at the same patch of dirt like it owed her something. At the general store, Pike handed me the salt and nails without a word, just that same pursed lip judgment he always wore. As I turned to leave, I paused. "You think I'm doing something wrong?" He looked up, caught off guard. "No, but out here, when things change, folks don't say if it's good or bad. They just call it dangerous." I didn't argue, just nodded, and walked out. Back home, I found the kids out behind the house. Martha had unearthed old seed packets from my cabinet and was turning over the dirt near the back wall. Her sleeves were rolled, her hands in the soil like she all belonged there. Sadie was humming again. Benji dragged a wooden bucket with a serious face. Emma sat in the sun, finally sleeping quiet. Martha looked up when she saw me. "You went alone," she said. "You didn't ask." "I'm not looking to be your burden." "You're not." "I don't need a savior. I'm not trying to be one." She stood then, brushing dirt from her apron, chin high but voice low. "Then what are you trying to be?" I looked at her for a long time, because anything worth saying usually took a while. "I'm just trying to hold what I can," I said, "and maybe not lose it." She didn't speak, but she heard me. That night, Sadie curled up beneath my old army coat. Benji started calling the dog scout, and Emma reached for my hand. I didn't pull away, and I realized something I hadn't dared to believe before. They weren't guests anymore. They were home. The days after the storm settled into something that felt almost like a life. Not a routine, not yet, but a rhythm, slow and uneven, like a new colt learning to walk. No one talked about staying, not Martha, not me. But no one mentioned leaving either, and that silence said more than a promise might have. Mornings came colder still. Frost bit at the porch railings and clung to the barn door like breath that wouldn't lift. Emma's wheezing had eased, but she still coughed in her sleep. Martha kept her wrapped close every night, checking her brow with the back of her hand like second nature. She didn't ask me for medicine. Figured if I had any, I'd offer. She was right. I didn't. One morning, I stepped into the barn without knocking. Didn't feel the need to anymore. They'd started to move through my space the way ghosts do. Quiet, careful, never overstepping, but present all the same. I waited near the door, bootsteps soft in the hay. Martha looked up from a pot of oats, her hand still stirring. "I'm heading to town," I said. She paused, didn't stop moving. "You need something?" I hesitated, the words sticking more than they should have. "You any good at talking to folk?" She gave me a look, not insulted, just measuring. "Depends who's asking." I said, "They'll talk if you walk in beside me. Otherwise, they'll start asking about you and me." She nodded, slow. "Understood." And so, for the first time since her husband died, Martha Elkins walked into town with a man beside her. She sat next to me on the wagon bench, Emma bundled in her arms, wrapped in 2 layers of blanket and that old shawl Sadie found in my trunk. I didn't explain why I kept it. She didn't ask. The road into town stretched longer than usual. The silence between us wasn't tense, just quiet, like neither of us wanted to name what was starting to take shape. Folks stared as we passed, not cruelly, not kindly either. Just the way people look when something new steps into their old world. Mr. Pike squinted when we entered his store. I ordered flour and salt. He looked to Martha, chin high, baby steady in her arms, and asked, "She yours?" "She's with me," I said. "Ain't that enough?" We stopped by the blacksmith for a new spade handle, past the chapel. Mrs. Larkin was sweeping dust off the steps like it mattered. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Martha. "She'll tell the whole county," Martha muttered. "Let her," I said, and kept the mule moving. When we got back, Sadie came running with her broken doll, Benji shouting about the candy Martha had in her hand. That night, after supper, I sat on the porch again. Martha stood nearby, arms folded. "Why'd you take us in?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. "Didn't mean to," I said finally. "Thought so. I just didn't send you away." "That's not the same." I shifted in my chair. "Your boy, Toby, he sees things. The fence work, that busted hinge on the coop, loose nail on the stall door. He works hard, doesn't ask for anything." She gave a small smile. "He's had to grow up too fast." I nodded. "Reminds me of someone." "Your son?" "No," I said quieter. "Never had one. I had a younger brother, died before I came back from the war. I was supposed to take care of him." She didn't speak after that, just sat beside me on the top step, not touching, not asking, just being there. Later that night, I went inside and came back out with a second chair, set it beside mine. Didn't offer it with words, just sat and leaned forward, waiting to see if she'd fill the quiet. She didn't, but she stayed. Next morning, Toby followed me to the field again. I didn't ask him to. Just noticed him standing by the fence line with that same steady look in his eyes. Sadie came too, small hands clutching a basket for stones. I didn't object. Handed her gloves without a word. She smiled like I'd given her something worth holding. Benji stayed behind, sitting by the door, drawing pictures in the dirt with a twig. Inside, Martha was sweeping the main room, not the barn, my house. She boiled water, dusted shelves, sorted tools I hadn't touched in months, not because I asked her to, because her hands didn't know how to be idle. That afternoon, when the fence line was nearly finished, Toby turned to me. "You ever think about going somewhere else, starting fresh?" I stared out across the field. "I used to." "And now?" I didn't look at him, just said, "Now I just keep the roof from falling in." He didn't press. That night, after supper, Martha folded my mended shirts into a crate she'd turned into a dresser. I noticed the way she let the lantern burn longer than usual, the way she filled the coffee pot without being asked, the way her eyes drifted toward the barn, but her feet never carried her back to it. And I began to understand, quiet and slow like dawn breaking, what I hadn't dared to believe before. They weren't just passing through, they were becoming part of the land. Same as me, same as the dust, the wind, the quiet. And I didn't want it any other way. Spring came slow that year, dragging its heels like it wasn't sure it belonged. The frost still showed up some mornings, curling along the fence posts like silver threads stitched into the land, but the air was changing, softer somehow. You could hear it in the way the wind moved through the cedar, feel it in the way the ground stopped crunching underfoot. Things were waking up again, so were we. That morning, we all sat around the table, me, Martha, the kids. No one said much, but we didn't need to. Martha set down a bowl of oats in front of each child, and I poured the coffee. Benji hummed a little tune he'd made up the week before. Sadie brushed crumbs off the table like it was her job. It all moved so natural, so easy, you'd think we'd been doing it for years. Then Sadie looked up, eyes wide and curious. "Are we going to stay here forever?" The question just hung there, weightless and heavy all at once. Martha looked toward me, but she didn't answer. Maybe she didn't want to say something that would pin us in place. I set my mug down and said it quiet but firm. "You already have." Toby looked over, like he was checking to see if I meant it. "I mean, even if folks in town don't like it," he said. "They'll get over it," I told him. And that was that. We went to church the next Sunday. First time I'd stepped foot in that chapel in over a decade. My old suit didn't fit like it used to, shoulders tight, sleeves short, but I wore it anyway. Martha dressed the children in what was clean. Her dress had been patched again at the sleeve, the same thread from the kid I'd given her weeks back. We walked in together, Martha carrying Emma, Sadie holding her hand, Toby and Benji just behind, and me last. No declarations, just presence. Folks stared. Some nodded, some didn't. Reverend Walker paused when he saw us, cleared his throat, then welcomed the congregation just like he always did. I sat beside Martha, my limp worse than usual after the long walk, but I didn't shift. Didn't feel small, not anymore. During the hymn, Benji dropped the book. Sadie whispered the wrong words. I smiled without thinking. Just let it rise up in me like breath. The land kept changing, slow and sure. Fences mended, the coop rebuilt. I showed Toby how to spot snake tracks near the creek and how to lay a rabbit trap without scaring the whole forest off. Sadie planted marigolds along the porch, said it made the house look less sad. Benji got bit by the mule and didn't cry, just swore under his breath and got back up like he'd earned a badge for it. Martha started a garden, and I found myself clearing more space beside her, moving in rhythm without speaking, like we'd always shared the dirt. One evening, after the sun dipped behind the hills and the kids were asleep, Martha stood beside me on the porch, arms crossed, the wind tugging at her hair. She didn't look at me when she said it. "You never asked me to stay." I didn't look at her either, just said, "I didn't." But I did. I turned a little then, hand brushing hers by accident. She didn't pull away. "Or maybe," I said, voice soft, "I couldn't have stopped you if I tried." She laughed at that, not quiet, full, and real, like it shook something loose inside her, inside me too. Later that night, Toby knocked on my door. He had a small wooden box in his hands, carved rough and plain. Inside was a figure, a man standing beside 4 smaller ones, crude but honest. "What's that?" I asked. He held it out. Didn't know what else to make, but I thought maybe you'd want it. I looked down at the carving for a long time. My throat caught, but I nodded. It's good work. You can keep it, he said. I do want it, I answered, and I meant it. He turned and walked back down the hall without another word. I didn't put the carving on the shelf. I left it on the table where I could see it. Next morning, sun came early. I was already outside, chopping kindling. The door creaked behind me, and Martha stepped out, blanket around her shoulders, coffee in hand. You're up early, she said. Always am. She walked up beside me and looked out over the land. You ever think about how it all happened? You waking up one day and finding 5 people in your barn? I didn't stop chopping. I think about it all the time. She stepped a little closer, voice soft. You ever wish it had gone different? I set the axe down, wiped sweat from my brow. No, I said. I don't think I'd change a damn thing. She smiled at that, then took my hand, and I let her. The last frost came without warning, the way all things final tend to arrive. One morning in April, I stepped out onto the porch with a mug in my hand, and the fence posts shimmered silver in the rising light. Cold clung to the ground like breath that hadn't yet let go. But the sky was clear, still, a good still, and inside the house behind me, there was movement. Soft footsteps, tin on tin at the stove, the faint creak of floorboards and the rustle of blankets. I didn't need to look to know it was Martha at the hearth, stoking the fire, or that Emma would soon be bundled and against her hip. I could picture Sadie pulling on her boots by the door, Benji trailing after her with his blanket still around his shoulders, and Toby already standing near the threshold, waiting for me with that same steady look he wore these days. Funny how you can live somewhere for years and not realize it was never a home until someone else walks through the door. That morning, we sat around the table like we had for weeks now. Martha serving, me pouring coffee, kids chattering low over oats and slices of fried biscuit. The walls, once silent, now held sound the way a fire holds warmth. Sadie asked about planting tomatoes. Benji wanted to build a fort by the creek. Emma reached for my hand again, and this time she held on longer. Later that week, Martha folded a letter into her apron. She said it came from her brother, still in Los Lunas. He had space for her and the children, said he'd be glad to take them in. You going to go? I asked, trying to sound more casual than I felt. She was quiet a moment. He means well, but he doesn't know the children anymore, and they don't know him. You think he'd be good to them? He'd try, but it'd be starting over again, and I don't think they have another start left in them. I looked down at my hands, scarred, calloused, cracked from years of weather and work. And you? She folded her apron with care. I used to think survival meant moving. Now I think maybe it means staying. The light in the room had softened by then. Her face was quieter, not sad, just resolved, like she'd lived enough hard years to recognize peace when it came wearing old boots and speaking in silences. I didn't ask you to stay, I said. You didn't have to. That night, after supper, I checked the animals and paused by the barn door. The wind had calmed and the hens were clucking softly. Inside the house, I could hear the floor creak under Martha's step, Sadie humming, Benji giggling at something that probably wasn't funny, and the low rustle of blankets being pulled close. I'd heard that house creak for years, but until now, it had never sounded like life. I went back inside, pulled off my coat, and sat in my chair near the stove. Emma stirred in the crib I'd patched together with my own hands. I leaned forward, slow and quiet, and placed one of Toby's carvings in her hand, a small horse. She closed her fingers around it, and I didn't look away. The days that followed were full of little things. Fence repairs, garden rows turned over, laughter that came easier, Sadie planting marigolds by the porch, Benji naming every chicken something ridiculous, Toby splitting wood without being asked, Martha baking real bread, not just frying scraps and leaving it cooling on the windowsill like she owned the place, because in a way, she did now. One afternoon, she joined me on the porch, arms crossed, her gaze on the hills beyond the property. You ever think about how it all happened? She asked. You waking up one day and finding 5 strangers in your barn? I think about it all the time. You ever wish it had gone different? I shook my head. I don't think I'd change a damn thing. She smiled at that, and then, just quiet and easy, she took my hand. We didn't talk about the future in big ways, didn't speak of weddings or names on deeds. But the life we built, quiet, steady, stubborn as the land, it was enough. More than enough. The kind of life that doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in, day by day, choice by quiet choice. I used to think loneliness was safety, that silence was peace, that if I just kept to myself long enough, nothing could get taken from me again. But then came a woman with fire in her eyes and too many burdens on her back. Then came a boy who worked harder than some grown men, a girl who hummed her way through grief, a little boy with dirt on his face and wonder bog in his eyes, and a baby who reached for me without knowing why. And somehow, I started living again, started caring again, started staying. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever found home in a place you never expected, or family in the quiet company of strangers, like the video, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. Because some lives aren't built from plans, they're built from presence, from showing up, from staying. And if Caleb Wren can open his door, maybe we can too.